Hey everybody, today we are going to talk about the integumentary system, which is basically the fancy word for the skin system. And the skin is the largest organ in our body. It makes about 15% of our body weight. And the skin, integumentary system, includes, yes, the skin, but also things like hair, nails, glands. And what we mean by glands would be like oil glands, sweat glands, and things that will release things outside of our body. And so collectively, the integumentary system does include those skins and then the accessory organs. So what does our skin do for us? It is vital in protecting us from our outside environment. It is our first line of defense against bacteria, against viruses, against things that might cause us some type of harm. Other functions is that it helps control the water that we have inside of our body, as well as the salts and other solutes, so calcium and phosphorus and those things that we take in. It's also going to contain sensory receptors for touch, for temperature, pressure, pain. It is also for warm-blooded creatures and cold-blooded creatures. It plays a vital role in making sure that our body temperature stays regulated. So even cold-blooded creatures that their body temperature fluctuates, their skin still plays a big role in making sure that it at least stays somewhat steady. It's also where a lot of our blood is found. So no matter where we cut ourselves in our skin, we're going to bleed. That's because there's a lot of blood in our skin. For Caucasians, we can see that blood flow because when we have kind of the pinkish tone sometimes in our skin, we see that as a type of blood flow. For everybody, no matter what the ethnicity is if you, let's say, take your thumb and you push on the back of your hand really, really, really hard and then release, you can actually see that you have removed blood from that area and then it floods back. It also plays a role in the making of vitamin D. And specifically, it is good for us to have sunlight with protection, of course, and create vitamin D. And then also it helps with our excretion. So when we talk about the excretory system, that's like the release of waste, urine, and that sort of thing. But those of us that have worked out and sweat before and it's gotten in our mouth, it's kind of a salty taste. It helps remove some of the salt and also the water from our body. The skin is made out of three layers. The epidermis, epi means outside or towards the top. It is mainly a layer of skin that is dead, and there's cells that have been keratinized or what's called cornified. Basically, they've hardened. So when you take, let's say, and you rub your skin, and then you look at those cells that might be removed, those are typically cells that are dead, but it's a very important layer because we don't necessarily want to have direct connection with living cells. Then you have the dermal layer, that's the middle layer. That's where a lot of our glands and receptors originate. And then lastly, we have the hypodermis, which is at the very, very bottom, and that is made specifically of fat as well as a connective tissue. This is not to be gross, but those of you that hunt and you've like skinned a deer or you've skinned a creature, you notice that when you take the skin off, there's kind of a white fibrous tissue. Well, that's partially fat, but also some connective tissue as well. So let's talk about each of the different layers of the skin a little bit more specifically. So let's start with the epidermis, and that's the one that we can see. That's the one that's towards the top. And that is a layer that specifically is a lot of dead skin cells, but then there's also some living that are involved with that. And basically what that is going to do is the cells are going to keep dividing down here, force these upward, and that's why we have skin cells that we're losing every single day. So most, on average, in our human body, most cells live about 90 to 120 days. The average skin cell lives far, far less than that. And we're always making more skin cells, and they're specifically happening right at the edge of the epidermis and the dermal layer. So this stratum basale that you're seeing here, or basal layer, base layer of skin, that's doing a lot of the replicating for us. With skin, we have to and we should talk about different races and different skin tones, ethnicities. And so when we talk about the coloring of things, there's several different factors that go into races or ethnicities. but arguably the most important one is called melanin. So keratin is a separate protein, and we have a lot of that like in our nails and in our hair. It's kind of more of a rigid type of material. Melanin is a protein that gives a pigment. And so if you are Caucasian, you don't produce a lot of melanin. If you are, let's say, the race black, that means that you produce a lot of melanin. And then if you're, let's say, Asian descent or Native American descent, that means that you might create a little bit of, somewhere in between. But even within races, so if we talk about, let's say, the black race, you have those black that might be a lighter skin black and those that are a real dark skin black. Same thing with Caucasian. We have those people that tan very well, and then we have those that are very fair skin and don't tan very well. And so tanning is basically the production of melanin that is happening seasonally. So if we go to our next slide, like I said, there's two different types of influence here. So the keratin we just talked about, and then the melanin is another one. So all races have the same amount or very similar amount of melanocytes. Those are things that produce the melanin. But what's different about the races is the amount of melanin that is produced. And so if we look at the hands in that picture, we see a lot of those different skin tones. Um, Not only does this happen like with races, but within an individual, if you've seen someone that maybe has kind of like skin blotches, maybe they have a lighter pigmentation, or maybe they have a darker pigmentation, or more specifically, let's say you have a mole or a freckle. All that means is in that area, you have produced more or less melanin. So if you have a mole or freckle, that means that it's produced a lot of melanin. If you have an area that's kind of a white patch, that means that you're not producing melanin in that area. So there's a whole bunch of genes and proteins that go into skin color, but it's not like, oh, I have this much melanin, that's what my entire skin is for. Different parts of our skin have different genes. All right, now let's get into our dermal layer. So this is a layer that has, like I said, a lot of our glands, a lot of our receptors. So if you look at this picture, we're seeing like where the hair root and hair follicle are. So that's where they're originating. If you've pulled out a hair before, it hurts sometimes. That's because you might have some pain receptors right near those, and so we perceive that as pain. This is also where a lot of our blood vessels are. So we're seeing kind of the blue and the red here of the capillaries and veins and arteries that might be in that area. So when we look at the slide, it says highly vascular. That just means it's got a lot of blood and a lot of veins and arteries that are in those areas. And so this is where a lot of our anatomy is going to come from in this chapter. So one more picture here. So it contains many of the sensory receptors for touch, pressure, vibration, pain, temp, all those things. If we talk, let's just talk about pain. You can have light pain where those receptors might be up here, and then you have deep pain where those receptors might be deeper in the dermal layer. And so it's kind of unique that we have different degrees of pain as well as different degrees of, interpreting, let's say, vibrations or pressure as well. When we talk about the appendages of the skin, so what else is involved with it? It includes those oil glands. It includes those sweat glands. So here you're seeing, for example, a sweat gland. The oil gland are also found in this area. And so they're going to release oils onto our skin. Oil is important because it helps lubricate our skin so it's not always dry. Now, sometimes in the winter we might have to put on a lotion or something like that. And then the sweat glands, they are part of our excretory system. They're going to release water as well as some sweat. Let's talk about some hair. So they're all over our skin as mammals, but sometimes that changes over time, like Mr. Bald Guy that you see here. And also this has changed. So we were thought to derive ourselves from primates or monkey lineage. They're very, very hairy. But as time has gone on, we have become less hairy. And why is that? Because we've developed things like clothing. We've developed things like covering. And so the need of hair has gone away and down over human history. So what hair actually is it's a way to preserve our body heat, but also in places like our eyelashes, eyebrows, ear hair, nose hair. Those things aren't just for fun. Instead, they're actually part of making sure that things are filtered as they enter our body. So if I ask you guys, is it healthier for us to breathe through our mouth or through our nose, we would say for sure through our nose. Why? Because nose hair help trap viruses, maybe some airborne bacteria, and other things. And sometimes we see that, let's say that we've been cutting wood or we've been in a dusty area, and then we blow our nose and we have all kinds of things that might be in our Kleenex. We see that nose hair has done its job. It has filtered out things that might have otherwise entered our body. And so hair does serve a purpose. And one thing about hair is there's actually two different kinds of hair. We have what's called vellus hair. That's what we have like on our head, our arms, our legs, that sort of thing. And then we have our terminal hair, which is a thicker type of hair. And that's what we have if we have facial hair for males, but also in our pubic areas, that's thicker kind of hair. And it's usually much more coarse and it can get longer in those areas. Our scalp also does have some terminal hair, but if you have fine hair, it just means that it might be a little bit more of the vellus type. And so if we look at a simplified part of our hair, we see that you have the shaft, the root, and the bulb. And so much like our skin is always kind of replacing and adding, so too is our hair. So these cells will actually become, they're basically growing, and our hair is actually dead. So think about all the money we spend on dead cells within our hair. It's kind of unique. Just like in skin color, hair color can also be influenced by the amount of melanin. So if you are like Mr. Mario Lopez here, you produce a lot of melanin, noticing that his hair is black, his eyes are dark, his eyebrows are dark. And then when we get to someone that is lighter, blonde or blue-eyed, they're going to produce less melanin. So melanin is found all throughout our body, with eyes, with hair, with skin, and it's a gene that we see phenotypically very prevalent because it's everywhere. And so now let's kind of skip to some of our other parts of our dermal layer, the sweat glands. We have about 2 to 3 million of these that cover our body. Some people sweat more than others. There's a lot of factors that go into that, and it's completely fine. They are going to be able to release that water and that salt all throughout our body. Most of sweat is actually salt. I'm sorry, is water, but there's a little bit of salt. It also releases, it's slightly acidic. So it's got a pH between 4 and 6. And the reason why it's slightly acidic is because it's releasing those salts, things like sodium, potassium, calcium chloride, which can be naturally more acidic. And so that's a unique thing is that we're releasing water, we're releasing salt, and we're releasing some acids whenever we sweat. Let's talk next about oil glands. As I mentioned, oil is important for our body because it is going to help lubricate the skin so that it doesn't dry out. And those are found also all throughout our body. And when we have zits or we have pimples, it's usually because an oil gland has been blocked. And so if you've heard of a black head before or a white head before, irregardless, you are releasing oil. It's just that oil gland has gotten blocked. And we see this a lot during puberty because our hormones are kicking in. We're producing a bunch of different things. And so sometimes acne or production of zits happens a lot in puberty because we are increasing the hormones, and hormones come from oils, they come from fats. And the last topic that we're going to talk about for this presentation are our nails. So our nails have a lot of keratin to them. This is the same thing that things like armadillos and a pangolin is made out of. And so basically what's happening is they are producing a higher protein, and that's what makes it more rigid in structure. There is a growing part of the nail. Eventually they harden over time, just like how our regular skin cells did. That concludes our presentation on the integumentary system.